Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of 3 Very Scary Horror Stories. Your suggestions for this episode were really good, so let's get right into it. Our first story today is called The Dream Eater. For our next story, I was hypnotized by a stranger in a parking lot outside of Walmart. My mother and I had just gotten done with our weekly Walmart shopping trip, and as we approached the car, this well-dressed man in his late 60s introduces himself as Joseph and says he is a hypnotist and that he saw me in the store and thought I had great hypnotic potential. I wasn't sure what to say, was kind of weirded out, but I played along and asked him to explain. He said that if I would allow him to hypnotize me, he could show me things that would blow my mind. He even offered to let my mom watch. At first, she was hesitant, but Joseph convinced her that there was no risk involved and that it would be over in a few minutes. I agreed and sat down in the back of the car. Joseph sat down across from me and began asking me questions about my childhood. As he asked each question, I felt myself drifting further until finally I looked up at my mom and everything went black. When I woke up, I was sitting on the curb with my head resting against the tire of the car. My mom was nowhere to be seen, and when I turned my head, I saw Joseph standing over me with a blank expression on his face. "Joseph," I called out in a weak voice. He didn't respond. Instead, he stared at me with these emotionless eyes. Then he began to walk away slowly, so I got up and followed him. He led me through the parking lot to a secluded part where there were very few cars. Then he turned around and looked at me. It was like something out of a horror movie. His eyes were now a piercing blue color, and they seemed to bore into my soul. "Why did you bring me here?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Because it's time for me to collect what is rightfully mine," he replied in a raspy voice that sounded like nails on a chalkboard. That asked when I realized that the man in front of me was not the same person who had introduced himself at my car a few minutes earlier. This was something else, something evil. He raised his hand and pointed 3 long, sharp nails at me. "You have something that belongs to me, and I'm going to take it whether you like it or not," he said. Just then my mom came running over and screamed, "Leave him alone." But Joseph ignored her and lunged at me. I screamed and ran as fast as I could, not daring to look back. I kept running until I reached my house. When I finally stopped, I looked back to see if Joseph was following me, but I didn't see anyone. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually I went inside and told my mom what had happened. She didn't believe me at first, but then she noticed that I was scratched up and bleeding. That's when she finally believed me. We never saw Joseph again, but sometimes at night I still hear him calling my name in that horrible voice of his, begging me to give him what he wants. I don't know what he meant by that, but whatever it was, I'm glad that he never got his hands on me. Our next story is called Don't Open the Basement Door. My grandmother passed away last year at the age of 98. She lived in a large Victorian house by herself after my grandfather passed away 30 years prior to that. We were all shocked when she died because she was still driving and taking care of her yard. Until the day she died, she was found unresponsive in her basement. The police ruled it a heart attack. Her passing was very sudden, and we were all in shock. No one knew what to do. So my sister and I went to her house to organize some things. I walked through the house to get to the basement door. The steps leading down were steep with no handrail. The door was solid wood with brass hinges. The basement was always freezing cold and had a strange draft even in the summer. I used to avoid going down there as a kid. When we were little, we used to play hide and seek in the house. And one time my brother hid down there. We didn't know there was a door at the bottom of the stairs. We only saw the top half of it from above. It was big enough for a person to fit through and open, but it was always shut tight. As I was walking down the stairs, I heard chains dragging metal moans. I quickly opened the door and rushed down the stairs into the basement to see what it was. I flipped on the light switch and the basement was empty. The chains were attached to a shelf on the wall and were dragging against the concrete floor. There was a padlock on the chain to keep it closed. I checked around to see if my brother was hiding and trying to scare me, but I couldn't find him anywhere. I even checked under the workbench where he liked to hide. To this day, I can still hear those chains dragging. It's terrifying. Our next story is called Playground at Night. This happened when I was a child. I remember seeing a swing set and a slide at the edge of my vision while lying in bed at night. I tried to ignore it, thinking that it was just a dream. However, the next morning I went downstairs to tell my parents about the swing set and the slide, but they didn't believe me. They told me that I was making things up and that there was no playground outside our house. I insisted that I had seen one, but no one listened to me. That night I went back upstairs to my room, but I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the swings moving back and forth and the slide making creaking noises. I decided to get out of bed and go investigate. I crept to the window and looked out into the backyard. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was a full-fledged playground in my backyard, complete with a swing set and a slide. But it wasn't like any playground I had ever seen before. The paint on the equipment was peeling, and there was a thick layer of dust covering everything. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. But that wasn't the only thing that I saw. I also saw a group of children playing on the equipment. They were laughing and screaming and having the time of their lives. But as I watched them, I realized that something was wrong. Their skin was pale and gray, like they hadn't seen the sun in months, and their eyes were black and soulless. It was like staring into an abyss. I wanted to call out to them, but I couldn't make a sound. I was frozen in place, staring at them in horror. Then one of the children turned his head and looked directly at me. I tried to look away, but it was too late. He had seen me. In a flash, he was at the window, his face pressed up against the glass, his black eyes boring into mine. I screamed and fell to the ground, scrambling away from the window. But I could still feel his gaze on me, even though he was gone. I never told anyone what I saw that night. I was afraid that they wouldn't believe me and that they would think that I was crazy. But sometimes at night I still hear the laughter of those children and the creaking of the old swing set. And I can't help but wonder if they're still out there, waiting for me to come back to the window so they can drag me out into the darkness and join them in their eternal playground. So there you have it, 3 more scary stories from the internet. Which one was your favorite? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to hear more, then stay tuned. I'll see you next time.